G'day guys, and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson, we're looking at key knowledge point 328. That is Unit 3, Area of Study 2, and the 8th key knowledge point for this area of study. Today specifically, we're looking at the roles of participants in workplace relations, including human resource managers, employees, employer associations, unions, and the Fair Work Commission. When we're talking about workplace relations, essentially we're talking about the relationship and communications that take place between employers and employees in all sorts of things, but particularly wage negotiations, negotiations around employment conditions, and any time there's a dispute between an employee and their employer, or groups of employees, or even the entire employee conglomerate of a business and the employer. The goal of workplace relations is ultimately to have a positive relationship between the employer and the employees. One where employees are satisfied so that they can be engaged and motivated, more productive and efficient. We know that. That's a key to this area of study. But certainly one where also businesses can remain really productive, competitive, and profitable. So we're not just talking about satisfying employees by paying wages that will bankrupt a business. No, it's about making sure your employees are satisfied and so are your business owners. And an environment with a culture where disputes, if they arise, are minimized and resolved quickly and effectively to everyone's satisfaction. Now, the key participants in workplace relations, apart from employees, and the human resource manager, I should add, tend to be involved when there are some serious negotiations going on or when everything else breaks down. The Fair Work Commission are the big dogs of workplace relations. When it comes to matters that apply to every business in Australia, the Fair Work Commission is going to be involved. When it comes to signing off on a new workplace agreement, the Fair Work Commission are the ones who sign off on that. When it comes to stepping in as the final arbitrators between a warring faction of employees and employers, the employers have been striking, the employers locking them out of the business. You sometimes see this sort of industrial action taking place on the news. It's usually the Fair Work Commission who are involved in the final settlement that settles that dispute, if at all. Fair Work Commission have all sorts of different roles. And those include hearing unfair and unlawful dismissal claims. We covered that in the last lesson. If you're accused of unfair dismissal or unlawful dismissal, and that goes to tribunal or gets tested, it'll be the Fair Work Commission who hear those claims. Certainly, if there are claims of bullying or harassment or sort of corruption within a business, the Fair Work Commission will investigate those claims also. Certainly, whenever there are updates to minimum wages and employment conditions for certain industries, those conditions are outlined in documents called the awards for each industry, which you'll find out more about soon, I promise. But the Fair Work Commission are the ones who would write those into effect. And certainly the Fair Work Commission are the body who approve or reject workplace agreements. So if you decide a new pay scale in negotiation with your employees for the employees within your business, and the employees sign off on it and you're happy with it, and you write a new agreement, it has to be sent to the Fair Work Commission for their careful scrutiny. They want to make sure no one's getting stooged by some dodgy clause you've included into the fine details on page 36 of the ramblings at the back of the document. The Fair Work Commission will make sure there's no sort of trickery like that, and they sign off on those sorts of documents as well. Now, I've put a little asterisk right up the top there where it says the Fair Work Commission is Australia's independent workplace, because one of the things to understand about a government body like the Fair Work Commission is that the members of the institution are appointed by the Governor-General at the recommendation of the government. So while these individuals, these people who make up the Fair Work Commission, the Fair Work Commissioners, are independent because they're not part of the government, they do owe their roles to the government. And the government is likely to recommend people for the positions that have similar values to the government of the day. Now, the Australian Fair Work Commission is a federal body, so you can expect that the people appointed to the Fair Work Commission at any one time will be people who align with the values of whichever party holds the majority in Canberra. And if you know much about Australian politics, you probably know that the Liberal and Labor parties have different priorities when it comes to employee and employer relations. And so it's important to understand that while the Fair Work Commission is an independent body, it's not necessarily the case that the Fair Work Commission is made up of individuals who hold truly neutral and balanced values. Now, employer associations. These are bodies, corporations, or cooperatives that are made up of lawyers and advisors and business owners or business managers, executive managers, who can assist each other and provide advice to other business owners or business managers when it comes to matters that relate to the general sorts of things that employers or business managers might experience. So certainly when it comes to negotiating new wage agreements with employees, these employer associations might back up the employer in those negotiations and give them advice about what they can and can't offer employees, what they would be silly to say yes or no to. Certainly, they'll help advise managers and business owners of changes in legislation that might be coming up or might be recently enacted, and what business managers and business owners need to do to protect their own business, to ensure that their own business is compliant. And certainly, whenever there's a dispute between employees and employers, these employer associations will be there on the side of the employer. Two examples I've got for you there. The Master Builders Association, which represents owners of and executive managers of building and construction companies and other associated trades. And certainly the Independent Schools Victoria, which is a body that works with principals in independent schools in Victoria. They back up the executive managers and the owners in those types of businesses. Employee unions are quite the opposite. They also provide advice and support to individuals in workplace relations, but they're often on the side of the employees. Well, they're always on the side of the employees. If you take the two examples that I brought out just before, Master Builders Association and Independent Schools Victoria, their counterparts, if you will, might be the CFMEU, the construction union, who represent employees within the construction and trades, and the Independent Education Union, who represent employees or teachers and support staff who work within independent schools in Victoria. In almost any industry you look at, in almost any geographical region, you'll probably find employer associations and unions for the same industries, and they exist for the same reasons. Where employer associations might back up employers in negotiations around new wage agreements, you can bet there's a union to back up employees in negotiations around new wage agreements. Where employer associations might offer advice to employers about how to handle new legislation or how to resolve disputes, certainly unions will be giving advice to employees or supporting employees when it comes to talking about ways that different or new legislation should be interpreted and what that might mean for employees and how to settle disputes from an employee's perspective. And certainly, if negotiations break down between employer and employees, it's the unions that will help the employees organize industrial action such as strikes. Now, as far as human resources management and workplace relations is concerned, the employer or the manager that we're dealing with is the human resources manager. In this area of study, we're focused primarily on human resources management. So the manager, as far as we're concerned, the person where the buck stops in this area of study is the human resource manager. And anytime there's a negotiation around wages or there's a dispute around conditions, it's probably the human resource manager who is heading up this process. Certainly, the human resource manager has some responsibilities, as you know, recruiting employees, training and development, monitoring employee progress by engaging employee performance management processes, and certainly implementing termination where that's necessary. Of course, just taking termination as an example, We talked a lot in that lesson about the need to do things by the book, because it's quite easy for termination to not necessarily be found to be legal. Unfair dismissal is entirely illegal, and it will be prosecuted by the Fair Work Commission. So employer associations would be able to help an HR manager going through the process of termination to ensure that that process is legal, whereas an employee union might be able to help an employee who suspects they've been terminated unfairly to investigate whether or not every process was followed to the letter there. Certainly, employees are the people who work in a business. We know this. Their role is to work towards the achievement of objectives. We know that as well. Certainly, when it comes to workplace relations, your employees will speak for themselves and negotiate new agreements. If an employer is looking to renegotiate wages, or if employees are seeking a chance to renegotiate wages, they will voice their opinions there. They'll vote on new agreements. It's part of the process in Australia that new agreements cannot be enacted unless representatives of the employees and the employer have signed off that they accept this agreement. And so employees typically vote to show their support or their rejection of a proposed agreement. And certainly it's the employees who will take industrial action if required. So they're the ones who stop working when there's a strike, or they're the ones who will engage in other similar actions. In summary for this key knowledge point, conditions and entitlements for your employees are often negotiated between parties. When it comes to workplace relations, when it comes to ensuring that the employees have what they need, the employers have what they need as well, employers and their representatives want to ensure that the business is profitable, particularly if this is a business where the owners or the shareholders are primarily interested in profit. If this is a for-profit business and the investors have invested looking for an opportunity to make themselves wealthy, then the management will want to ensure that the business remains as profitable as possible. And so they don't want operations to cost too much. Where employees and their representatives, the unions, will want to ensure that employees are getting a fair deal. And the concept of a fair deal might be a bit different whether you're asking the employees or the employers. And a good HR manager, a really effective HR manager, will find the point at which the two overlap, or the two come closest to being similar. It can be a very difficult, if not almost impossible task to bring employers and employees to an understanding in some cases. In other cases, employers might be a little bit more generous. In other cases, employees might be a little bit more understanding of the needs for businesses to have objectives other than just meeting employee needs. However, balancing those conflicting interests is a challenge that every HR manager has to face. And when that can be done, when that balance can be achieved, you've got a culture of understanding, and a culture in which the employees feel valued and the employers or the business owners feel like they've got a good deal and they've got a supportive and hardworking body of staff. Well, that's a culture in which things are going to get done. And this business is likely to be more competitive, more productive, and more efficient than a business where one or neither of those parties is satisfied. That's all for today. See you next time.